Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jason Lehman. I'm the marketing team lead here at Fishbowl Solutions, and I'm happy to be joined by my colleague, Brent Genero. Welcome, Brent.
Hello.
And today we're going to be discussing how you can better understand your best options for Oracle WebCenter content migrations. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. A few housekeeping items before I get into the agenda. This webinar is being recorded. Every registrant will receive a recording to the webinar within a few business days. I also encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. We won't be taking questions over the phone or via audio, but you can type your question in the Q&A box. There's a little icon within the Zoom interface that you can put your questions into. We'll monitor those questions throughout the webinar and do our best to answer them at the end. Also wanted to mention that this webinar is in a series of webinars that Fishbowl is planning for 2020. So every month we're planning to give a webinar on a tip and trick type of topic that'll be very educational in nature. We'll provide some information at the end of today's webinar where you can go to sign up for those webinars that we're planning for the rest of the year. So here's today's agenda. We'll be starting with giving everyone an understanding of the options that customers have to migrate content from WebCenter. We'll also look at the challenges that customers experience with those options. And then Brent will be going over a deep dive into an option that we've built out, another solution for WebCenter migrations. We'll also do a comparison against what most customers are familiar with, the archiver component of WebCenter, with that new solution. Brent will also be given a demo of the new solution that we've built out. We'll summarize today's webinar and take questions at the end. The other thing I wanted to mention is, as we plan for topics for the rest of the webinar series this year, we'll be sending everyone a survey to get your input on the content of this webinar, as well as other topics that you'd like to see for webinars in the future. A quick overview on Fishbowl Solutions before we dive in. And so really Fishbowl is trying to help customers solve their costly and frustrating knowledge sharing problems. We've been doing that since 1999, and really focusing on Oracle WebCenter is one of the solutions that we help customers solve those problems with. So we've specialized in enterprise content management and portal using WebCenter, really to help customers better manage, retain, and distribute content through enhanced desktop and mobile experiences. We also help organizations leverage Oracle content and experience in their cloud offering, focusing on developing omni-channel experiences for their digital content. Most recently, we've been developing mobile applications and creating digital assistants for customer service and sales enablement using Oracle's Mobile Cloud Hub. And to help you find all that value-add content in your organization, we provide enterprise search software and services for both on-premise and cloud-based use cases, leveraging Mindbreeze and Google Cloud. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent.
Sure. So first of all, we want to discuss, why you might want to be migrating content with WebCenter. Usually that's due to an upgrade. You might have software running on old hardware. You might have a legacy version of WebCenter, and you no longer have Premier support. There's a lot of security risks associated with being on an older version, or you might want to take advantage of the capabilities of newer versions. And sometimes you just want to consolidate your content into one instance. Sometimes you're not even you're not necessarily upgrading. You just want to sync up your test and your prod environments so that they have the same data. So as far as WebCenter's current migration options, there's really two that have been available. The first one is to use the archiver and the configuration migration utility. The archiver handles migrating content and database tables, while the configuration migration utility handles the migration of all your configuration. The only real other option has been more of a cloning approach. That will be when you copy the file system and the database of your WebCenter source system, and you copy that to a new location. essentially creating a new instance. So the archiver does allow you to choose specific assets to migrate, specific content and specific configuration. And it is the supported approach, it's standard. On the other hand, the archiver does take a lot of time to configure and execute. It is error prone. As far as the cloning approach goes, it does create an identical instance, which could be what you want. It's a quick solution, and it does not require you to rebuild the index afterwards. On the other hand, that's more of a one-time migration. You can't migrate a subset of content. You have to take everything, and that means you can't purge or remap the metadata of your content as it comes into the new system. In this webinar, we're going to focus on the archiver option, as the cloning is more of a specific use case. So to review the current migration process with the archiver, basically, here's our interface with the archiver. You have our old WebCenter instance on the left and the new WebCenter instance on the right. So to move your content from one to the other, it first requires you to export content on the old instance. What that does is copy all of your content and metadata and store them in batch files on your file system. Once that's complete, you then have to transfer all of those batch files over to the new system. Once the files are on the new system, you can then perform an import, and the content is finally in the new system. Now, while this seems fairly straightforward, in reality, the process usually looks a little messier. Fishbowl has done quite a few migrations in the last 15 years, and we constantly run into a lot of issues. And the issues look something like this. So first of all, the configuration process involves creating outgoing providers on both instances, restarting. You then have to set the appropriate socket host security filter settings so that the two can communicate. You have to make sure your archives are targetable so you can transfer to the new system. And you might run into firewall issues and many other challenges just related to configuration. In addition, the archiver interface is kind of confusing. If you've never used it before, it can be pretty daunting. So once you get the configuration complete and you start your export process, you often run into this issue, and that's that you run out of disk space. As I mentioned, when you do an export, it has to create all those batch files, and the batch files take up even more disk space than they're already taking up as content in the content server. In addition, the source and destination will both need this temporary disk space. So before you can even get anywhere, you're simply stuck, and you have to have your IT give both servers temporary disk space just to keep going. So eventually, when you get everything transferred to the new server and you perform an import, what happens is that after a few minutes, your import aborts due to too many errors. Now, there are settings that you can enable to allow it to continue past a larger number of errors before it aborts. But regardless, you end up having archiver logs flooded with tons of errors. Some errors are as simple as an option list not being available on the destination server, or there's often the release date is not later than the latest release version when two revisions have the same date. And there's our fair share of rare and confusing errors that we don't know what to do about. So typically what happens is you start resolving some of these errors, and then you try your import again. You see more errors, and you try to resolve those, and you import again. So you end up getting into this continuous process of resolving and retrying. This leads to a lot of duplicate work, as all of the successful items end up getting imported multiple times. Now it does become difficult at that point to track what made it into the system and what threw an error. Out of the box, there is a archiver replication exceptions component that can be enabled, and that will allow you to have all items that through errors moved into a new import exceptions archive, where you can then handle just those errored items. The problem is, when you try importing from that archive, what happens when they error out a second time? Now you're still in the same situation you just were. So once you get past the errors and you think you have everything complete, you find that you might be missing content items. The problem is there's no good way to track what made it in and what made it, what errored. So the typical way to check is to do a quick search and see if both environments have the same number of errors. Now, the same number of content items. If you see that the results are the same in both environments, you might think you have everything, but that doesn't account for previous revisions. It's only going to let you know that you have the same number of latest released revisions. In addition, what happens when you don't have the same number of results? In this case, you have no good way of telling what you're missing. This usually results in having to go to your database administrator and have them perform a direct query on the database so that you can see what the difference is between the two environments. Often, we end up getting some content items that import with their revisions in the wrong order, for who knows what reason. In this case, I've found that you might not be able to import the items at all. It just tells you that a previous item cannot be imported over a newer item. So you end up kind of getting stuck. And after troubleshooting the errors and getting stuck some more, you might finally decide that it's best to delete your content and start over from scratch. And this is a very typical story where you end up losing a weekend, or you lose your progress from the week of migrating. And it's very discouraging. So to get around all of these problems, we created our own migration tool. The Fishbowl's migration tool is a set of custom components. There is an import component that gets installed on the destination server, which provides the UI and it controls the migration. Then there's an export component that gets installed on the source server. That simply provides services for the import component. Combined, this tool is capable of transferring millions of items from a 10G server, 10G or later server. In addition, it directly transfers the items. There is no need for an intermediate file system location. And finally, it tracks all revisions, so you can ensure that all your content was migrated. So the process for migration with the migration tool looks something like this. First, you create a connection to your source server by simply providing the URL and some administrator credentials. You then create a migration batch based on metadata criteria, and you configure your metadata mappings. Then you kick off the migration. Then you can monitor it and handle any errors that appear. So I can show you a demonstration of this, and what we're going to see is that I will configure a source server, create and build a batch, set up some metadata mappings, and then I'll kick off the transfer and show you how we can do our error handling. And then we'll also be able to see that we can monitor the progress and the performance of the migration. So with that, I will switch over to our demo. First, I'll log in. So this would be our destination server, and our tool provides a migration dashboard. And on this dashboard, you can see that we have a list of source connections. I already have one source connection set up. This is the connection to our source server. If I want to create another source connection, it's as simple as providing a name, the URL, and the admin credentials, and hitting create. Right now, I'm going to click into our existing try it source connection. And here you can see that we have a migration batches tab and a metadata mappings tab. Right now we have one batch already created where we migrated our policies. But what we're going to do is create a new batch for procedures. I'm going to do that by clicking migration batch and name it procedures. And in this case, it's everything with a dedoc type of equal to procedure. I can optionally include expired content as well and test the query. In this case, we can see I have 107 revisions that match this query. And since I think that looks correct, I'm going to go ahead and create it. So now if I expand our new batch, you can see that there isn't much other than that it knows there was 107 matching revisions. What we first need to do is a full build, and a full build will basically take inventory of all matching revisions on the source server. That way it can track them and make sure we get every single item. So after building, you can see that we now have the progress bar indicating that we have 0 of 107 revisions with 0 errors. If I go over to the remaining items, I can see that we have 107 remaining items. This is all the content that needs to be migrated. So before we actually perform the migration, what I can do is say preview next. And this will take the first item to be migrated and show us the initial metadata alongside the new metadata. So the initial metadata will show everything from the source server. The new metadata will show you what that metadata would look like once it gets migrated. I'm going to go ahead and try just migrating this item. But we instantly see that we run into an error. And in this case, it's because our security group is not valid on the destination server. So we need to set up a metadata mapping. So I'm going to close out of this, scroll up and go to our mappings tab. So what we see on this tab is various mapping sets. If I go into our standard mapping set, you can see that we have a set of field maps and value maps. Our field maps allow us to take metadata fields and assign them metadata fields on the source server and assign them to metadata fields on the destination server. It's as simple as drag and drop. For any value maps, we can take any initial values coming in and map them to new values on the destination server. So for example, on an old 10G server, if there was a sysadmin author, we could have that mapped automatically to the WebLogic user in our new system. What I'm going to do right now is use the standard mapping and make a procedures mapping for that. So I'm going to actually clone this mapping. We'll call it procedures mapping. So we're going to clone that standard mapping. And as you can see, we're now in a procedures mapping set that is an exact copy of our standard mapping. So now that we are going to migrate procedures, what I'm going to do is go to our value maps, and I'm going to say any DDoc type that was a procedure I'm going to change to policy procedure, which is the DDoc type on the new system. In addition to that, I want to give the DDoc name, the content ID, a new prefix on the destination system. So I'll give it a webinar 1, and you'll notice that it'll be underscore and then DDoc name with IDOC script. So this will take the existing DDoc name and add the prefix to it. This is very handy for lots of reasons, and you can use a lot of different IDOC script to even create if-then logic to get the mappings you want on the new system. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and close out of our mapping. If I go back to migration batches, I can open our procedures batch again, and now I'm going to set the mapping to be the procedures mapping. Then I'm going to go review our errors. We previously had one item error out, and we can see that here. If I click view again, we can now look at the metadata mapping and see that our new metadata will have our new metadata or webinar 1 prefix. Our DDoc type of procedure becomes policy procedure. Now if I retry this migration with the metadata mappings, let's see what happens. In this case, we were successful. Now that the item and both revisions were migrated, I can click the content info, and now I can see that all of our content made it across for that content item. This is how we know that we were successful. So now I can close out of the error review page. And at this point, I can look at the completed bucket. So if I review the completed items, we can see that we actually had those 2 items successfully migrated. And in addition to that, we can see the old DID, the old DDoc name, alongside the new DID and the new DDoc name. This allows you to verify that your items in your old server made it to the new server. So at this point, if I'm confident that I have my metadata mapping set up correctly, I can kick off the migration. I can do that by enabling this procedures batch. And in a little bit, we will see it kick in. It is now active, and we'll see that the successfully migrated items are increasing. We can also see that some items are also throwing errors, and that number is increasing too. We can also see our current rate. Right now, we're around 5,000 revisions per hour, and we can also see that we're migrating about 887 megabytes per hour of files. While we are migrating, if we did run into a large number of errors, it is possible to configure the tool to email an administrator to let them know that they hit a high number of errors. This means you don't have to sit and watch the tool. You can do other tasks and be alerted if there are any errors that need to be brought to your attention. I'll also mention that at the bottom, we can optionally migrate the web viewable and the thumbnails, including workflow history. Because you can migrate web viewable files and thumbnails, the destination server doesn't need to get bogged down with reconverting, which speeds up the process altogether. In addition, up at the top, there is a speed that indicates the number of threads the migration tool will use. This allows you to adjust the amount of activity that you would be hitting your source server with. It's also possible to enable export throttling and give a time when the migration tool will be on a different speed. This can be very useful because you might not want to hit the source server, which could be a production server, during business hours. So at this point, it looks like we might have migrated all of the procedures we can. I'm going to disable that. The remaining items are items that haven't been tried yet because they're stuck behind items that have errored out. So once again, we can review our errors. Now we only have 4, but this could potentially be thousands of errors. In the situation where you're missing, say, option list value, you might have hundreds that errored out for them that same error. At that point, it is possible to filter by some text in the error. In this case, I filtered by profile and see 2 items. It would be possible to check every single item that is related to the missing option list value and retry just those items. This way, you can just remigrate those items and continue to resolve other errors. The tool can keep working while you work on other issues. Right now, I'm going to filter on a different error, and that is our release date error. And this is a common issue where the 2 revisions have the same release date. If I go ahead and view this item, you can see that revision 4 ran into the problem. Now, if I hit retry, it's just going to go through the same process where the validation of the system is going to prevent it from being checked in. But in this case, we actually have a force migrate feature, which will bypass the validation. We're okay with the 2 dates being the same. And you can see it went ahead and let that revision be migrated, and it continued the rest of the content item revisions. One other feature is that while you're migrating, the source server might have additional check-ins, additional metadata updates, possibly deletions. At any point, you can hit refresh batch, which will rebuild and look for any new revisions that were checked in. It will look for any metadata updates that occurred, and it will look for any deletions that occurred and update your tables accordingly so that you can migrate all those items that you were missing. This is very helpful before a cutover where you just want to get the items that recently were migrated. One other thing I'd like to point out is that while you're migrating millions of items, you might want to track your performance. We can do that through the performance view right here. If I put in a recent time frame, I can see that there were three sets of content where you can view the duration, how many revisions were migrated, and you can see trends, either in revisions per hour or transfer per hour. Now this was a quick migration because it was only 100 items. But a typical migration might look something like this, where you can view your trends with your revisions per hour and your transfer per hour. So to recap our pain points with our archiver, we have configuration issues, we have temporary disk space issues, massive error logs, missing content, and often you delete your content and start over. With Fishable's migration tool, you can see there's a quick and easy setup. There's a direct transfer, so no disk space is needed. There's robust error management. Every revision is tracked, so you know you're not missing any revisions. And we found it to be reliable with millions of items. No need to start over. So in summary, the out-of-the-box archiver does have free options, and it can be useful, but when you're dealing with a lot of content, the Fishbowl migration tool really can fill those gaps, and it can also be enhanced. And regardless of your use case, Fishbowl can help with any issues you're dealing with.
Awesome, thanks Brent. That was a great comparison of the migration tools that are available out of the box with WebCenter with the new tool that Fishbowl has built out, as well as a great demo of that new solution. So with that, we're going to be closing the webinar. As Brent summarized, I just wanted to also mention what I said at the beginning of the webinar is that this will be a monthly webinar series. So we'll have another webinar in April, and going forward from there, I will be sending out a survey to everyone that registered asking for your input and some of the topics you'd like to see us cover. So expect that within a few days as well. You can go to that link at the bottom, and that is available from our homepage. If you click on there, that's where you can sign up for any of the webinars that we have planned going forward. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box. I'm not seeing any questions right now. As you consider any questions, you can reach out to your Fishbowl account manager, and they can put you in touch with the right person or people to get those questions answered. And if you're looking for other information regarding all of the solutions and services that Fishbowl Solutions provide, we have many different information sources available to you, our website and social media channels listed here. Encourage you to please check that out. We get pretty active with blog content and things like that, so a lot of different resources for you specifically to WebCenter. Again, we appreciate everyone joining today, and just that final reminder, we will have other webinars in our series, so please check us out on our homepage to see what those topics are going to be. But for now, we're going to close, and we wish everyone a great day. Thank you.